understanding the threats and opportunities. And I'm delighted also to be here with our two speakers in this session who I'd like to invite to join me up in the panel now. I would like to welcome back Luis Alberto Moreno, the president of the Inter-American Development Bank. And I'd like to welcome also Hamad Buamim, who's the chair of the ITC World Chambers Federation and the president and CEO of the Dubai Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Welcome to both of you. So I just want to set the stage a little bit for everyone to understand what we're doing in this first conversation. So later on, we'll be talking about some of the achievements that we've seen at a country level so far in Latin America in terms of developing a relationship with the Arabian Gulf. And we'll be looking at some country-specific examples from important economies in Latin America like Colombia, Mexico and Brazil, where we've seen some big sort of political changes over the course of the past year. And then tomorrow we're going to shift to a focus on key sectors and issues. So we'll be talking about things like innovation, infrastructure, energy, agribusiness. So this session right now is actually to inform all of that discussion later today and tomorrow. It's really to provide the global context, the rationale for a pro-globalization stance. Because we have to recognize that what's happening between the two regions and this search for globalization as a means of producing better economic outcomes comes in a context in the recent past of sort of an anti-globalization stance on the part of the US and parts of Europe. And we've seen the bilateral trade war between the US and China creating a lot of uncertainty in the global economy that's really weighing on both regions. So the question is, how can this deepening of cooperation produce better economic outcomes for both regions? So that's really the context for this morning's discussion. And I'd like to ask Mr. Moreno first about the IDB partnership with the Dubai Chamber and how that fits into this sort of complex global dynamic and how that could actually alter sort of trade and investment trends for the better for both regions.
Well, thank you very much, Fiona. It's a pleasure to be here with Hamad, and I'm glad that when this forum was held, President Varela was there last year, and he invited everybody to Panama, and here we are. Look, I think the most important thing to have in mind is the following. Latin America as a region needs to import about 5% of GDP in terms of capital that we import every year. That's basically either through debt or investment. The UAE and Dubai, of course, are essentially capital exporters. And so that amount of savings that they have, it can be put to very good use. Secondly, there's a lot of areas where, I don't know, there's a problem. Okay, there's a lot of areas in our hemisphere where we could trade far more with UAE, as I said earlier. Much of the trade is concentrated largely in 3 countries. We still are, in Latin America, largely commodity exporters. You were mentioning China. If you look at China trade with Latin America, which has basically more, started from almost 0 20 years ago to about a total of 13% of total Latin American trade. In the last 2 years, it's gone up to almost 18%. That is largely concentrated in 5 commodities, be it food or mineral commodities. So the question is, how do we find ways to integrate better? Food security is a very big issue for the Gulf and for the Gulf countries, and they have been investing around food security. So again, this is another area where we can do a lot.
Great. And Hamad Buamim, how are these new global dynamics affecting private sector companies around the world, and how is the World Chambers Federation responding?
Yes, first of all, thank you, Fiona. And it's really a pleasure to be here in Panama City and ready to have, I would say, kind of a new crowds that our businesses would like to interact more and more with. Talking about emerging countries, there is no doubt that a lot of things can be done. We believe that a lot of emerging countries usually depends in big economies and big markets. And one thing for the past maybe 10 years in Dubai, we realized that we can unlock a lot of opportunities if we start to focus our attention more in emerging countries. We believe that businesses always can find ways around developed countries, and a lot of big businesses also, they can find their ways around the world. However, chambers of commerce usually represents a lot of their memberships as small and medium businesses. And to be able to unlock more and more of opportunities for businesses, we start focusing more in emerging economies and emerging markets. And talking about this, of course, Latin America is a great potential, especially if we start connect them with the markets that can complement what they do. And this is where the Gulf markets can provide that. As President Marino mentioned in his speech, we do trade, but we don't trade much. Gulf countries import a lot of what we consume, and if you look at cities like Dubai, we use the city of Dubai like a warehouse where we redistribute almost 70% of whatever we import from all over the world. However, the share of Latin America is less than 2%. So focusing in what can be unlocked is, again, a lot of areas that can be consumed in the whole of our region can be definitely supplied by this part of the world. And here, of course, one example, we talked about agriculture, and we do a little bit of agriculture, but it's still focused in Brazil, Mexico, and Argentina. But much more can be done from the other parts of the world. But we believe that we can do more than just exporting commodities if we can really start looking into areas by providing value addition. This can definitely open more opportunities for businesses and more opportunities for the people in these emerging countries. Going forwards, we believe that trade will continue to play a big role of the global economies, and part of that in emerging economies. Emerging economies going forwards, we believe not only they will be producers for the rest of the world, but also they can be consumers, and their economies are trending up. And this is where we see values of collaborating with emerging countries. And looking at the World Chamber Federations, we are a network of chambers of commerce, more than 12,000 chambers around the world. We have good representations in Latin America, but we're trying to get the private sector to play a bigger role going forwards. And this is where the private sector also based in the small and medium businesses that definitely can play a role, and much more can be done. Of course, information is a key in that, and we hope through collaborations with institutions like IDB, more of that can be showcased. Financial services, especially if we talk about trade finance. We saw, again, with technology, much more can be done, and hopefully this will unlock a lot of opportunities, and a lot of that can be with emerging economies.
Thank you very much. I want to ask Mr. Moreno, in terms of the IDB as an organization, how the IDB can support Latin America as it attempts to develop and address this new changing global dynamic in terms of being more export driven and having more of a focus on export diversification and cooperation with regions like the Gulf?
Well, we have, of course, for a very long time had a very large trade practice, the team of which is run by Fabricio Perti, who, among other things, helped put together this event. But what is it that we do? Certainly provide knowledge through a lot of analytical work, like the report that we have produced for this event. Equally working with all the export development agencies, working in furthering something that's always been an aspiration and a hard thing to follow, which is how do we integrate more our economies. The unfortunate thing is that the one area where there's a lot more opportunity for Latin America is trading within Latin America. And if you compare regions of the world, you know, Europe, for instance, close to 50% of the trade, a bit more, is within European countries and within the Union largely. In the case of Asia, trade within Asian countries is over 65%. In Latin America, it's hardly 20%. So there's a lot of room to grow, and certainly when you look at value chains, this is a critical part, and there's value chains to be created around Latin America. Some of them happen, you'd say, in certain specific industries, And that's the kind, again, of work that we do. We are basically work as the secretariat for the Pacific Alliance. We do the same, supporting the whole Central American integration system. We support many of the efforts that are done around not only trade integration but physical integration, which is just as important. And here I refer to, for instance, what's called the single windows, which are basically the electronic windows that allow a combination of government institutions to act in unison, such that we don't have the case that I was mentioning earlier, where containers can stay in a port for 3-4 days, and you compare that when you go to the Gulf countries, and the speed with which they mobilize cargo has a huge effect on productivity. So these are the kinds of things that we are constantly working on. And certainly in the physical integration, then is the whole question of the connectivity. I mean that, Panama has that in terms of its canal, but as President Valera has been trying to do is connect the rest of the country to that. And you have, for instance, just the expansion of the Panama Canal created opportunities for countries like Costa Rica to have huge investments for basically for container ports just to house those ports. As I was listening to Hamad, I was thinking, one of the many times I've been at the UAE, they will tell you the following. From the UAE, you have an access to about 2.5 billion people within 5 hours. So it's no surprise that it can be used, a city like Dubai, as a warehousing possibility, like some Argentinian companies have done, basically to warehouse their products and distribute from there. These are the kinds of things around logistics and transport that not only do we devote time in thinking about, but also informing such that businesses then can reap the benefits of that.
That's really vital to participate in those global value chains. And that's something that Latin America hasn't really done to a large extent.
And this is our big deficit, and this is the only thing that is going to transform our trade as we know it. And more importantly, I think something that is happening that I think, when you think of countries around the world, there's probably 2 or 3 countries in Latin America that will be developed countries in the next decade. One of those countries, among others, is Panama. Now, what does Panama have to do to get to that point where, if you look at the last 60 years, only 13 countries in the world were able to go from, high income, move really into high income developed countries from being, middle income countries. And only 13 in the world, countries like, among others, like South Korea or Greece for that matter. And the challenge there depends on the type of country. But, you could think of a country like Panama in a period of 10 years having an income similar to that of the Southern European countries, or like Chile is very much on its way to getting there. Uruguay also. Those are 3 countries in Latin America that are very interesting cases. But a lot of that, in a case like Panama, will depend, in my view, on how you benefit more from the logistics. The biggest growth in trade in the world today is not the traditional trades in goods, but it's electronic commerce. How do you use the logistics that you have in a country like Panama to become a hub for electronic commerce, which is also something that has been done extremely well in places like Dubai.
Absolutely. So why don't we bring you in, Hamad Buamim, to actually tell us a little bit about how this strength in logistics developed in Dubai, and sort of the rationale for that development, and for export diversification in goods and services more generally, how it sort of developed and sort of what the result has been and what sort of the lessons could be for Latin America.
I would say trade is one of those industries that, if you look back in history, didn't develop much. Actually, the last real developments or innovation happened in trade was back in the 50s with the invention of the containers. And since then, we believe that going forward, the real thing that will change trade is the blockchain. And all the innovation, we are testing it in Dubai at maybe smaller scale, but we believe if we can definitely integrate it globally, we can unlock a lot of opportunities. And talking about blockchain, if you take just one example, trade is based on papers. And this is something started back in 1918. Actually, the International Chamber of Commerce played part of that through all these documentary credits and exchanging bill of ladings and certificates of origins. And something I didn't realize till I read the recent reports by the Future of Trades, which was done by Dubai Multi-Commodities Center, published only last month. It says that the cost of papers is around, it's around 20% of the total cost of trade. And the total cost of trade is around $1.8 trillion. So you're talking about 360 billion US dollars annually is done just because of the trade. So if we can eliminate that, we're reducing the cost of trade and trading by 20%. And this can open a lot of opportunities. And this is what's being tested in Dubai, and I know IDB is involved in a number of things. I know we talked that MasterCards, they are part of something Dubai is testing, but we hope we can expand that throughout the world and make that part of our policies governments can embrace. Definitely we can make it more efficient, we can make it faster, more transparent even, and that can open opportunities for a lot of countries. This is, of course, one part of the whole thing. And if you start using the same technology of blockchain, you start to know more about consumers, more about the products, and you can fill the gap of trade finance, which is $1.5 trillion annual gap. Again, something we are trying to test in Dubai, but we have a small scale. Trade is big for us in Dubai because we are kind of warehouse and the gateway for our parts of the world. But we believe these things definitely we can duplicate other parts of the world, such as Latin America, and we can do a lot of things. I know also a few things Dubai World is testing in Colombia and in parts of Latin America, trying to speed up things because kind of a perceived high cost in this part of the world is the bureaucracy. And maybe one example you gave is number of days it takes to export a container and the inspection and these sort of things. But definitely if we can do embrace technology, we can reduce the risk, reduce the cost, and open a lot of opportunities. And this is only talking about trade. We believe, of course, when we look at Latin America, it's not only about importing or exporting things to this part of the world. However, the potential is a lot more than that. And if I take maybe the Dubai Chamber hat, I think we have a lot of expertise in Dubai, especially in areas like logistics, trade, tourism, and infrastructure that can be exported and partner with a lot of members in this part of the world and can open a lot of opportunities for both sides.
Mr. Moreno, is that the key, actually, to increasing innovation, which is sort of a prerequisite to higher productivity and faster growth rates? And that's something that maybe has been problematic in Latin America to date, sort of this innovation question. And are you concerned, because this is, again, a major sort of global question and global developments around technology, are you concerned that Latin America could fall behind and we could have this two-speed developed markets versus emerging markets when we move into the era of the Internet of Things and 5G? How do you see Latin America? Where is Latin America positioned, and could someplace like Dubai really help boost with technology transfer?
Well, the way I like to think about it is this. Latin America missed the Industrial Revolution, and for a variety of reasons. And it put us into a path of import substitution and a lot of things that really retarded Latin American growth. The one thing that I believe that we cannot miss is this technological revolution. And this technological revolution is happening at a speed that we've never seen before. So if you look at aggregate numbers, how much does Latin America invest in research and development and around basically empowering technology? Well, all countries in Latin America put together invest about 90% of what a country like South Korea invests. And here I see a lot of opportunity with countries in the Gulf, and especially with the UAE. Dubai especially has done a lot in the way of developing technologies. They've become very big, for instance, in the semiconductor field. I mean, a number of the sovereign wealth funds of the UAE basically have been big investors around technological solutions. And this, I believe, is the one space that we can do much more. Actually, as we speak, we have a big event going on from the IDB around fintech, where we brought a lot of regulators from around the region, a lot of people who are doing fintech developments. And here there's at least 5 or 6 unicorns that are developing in Latin America that are all around fintech. And the reason being is that if you say compared to other regions of the world, take Africa for instance, the development in Africa around fintech is much faster than that of Latin America. And to me, a lot of the reason has to do with regulation, and especially the traditional banking regulation and payment systems. But then again, around a wide variety of applications, there's a lot of innovation taking place really from a lot of millennials, and the real question is how those companies become bigger in scale. And the way to get bigger in scale, as we have seen, say, in many of the platforms that have been developed in the United States, is really a question of funding and venture capital, and the rounds of venture capital that you can put in place. That's a big deficit that we have today. But clearly the ingenuity, the capacity to imagine and to do things is here. The question is, we have that ecosystem that has weaknesses, one being financial and the other one being education. I mean, I give you an example. A Guatemalan citizen, Luis Buamim, who is a really brilliant Guatemalan, he wanted to study math. He could only get to study math the way he wanted by going outside of Guatemala, because there were not more than 5 students in his class that were willing to study the kind of level mathematics that he was willing to do. He went on to the United States, developed a company called CAPTCHA, and then one called Duolingo. It's, again, a unicorn. And here's a Guatemalan who is no more than 35 years old. There's a lot of stories like that, but it is that part of the ecosystem in the educational space and in the venture capital space that is weak and that we need to enrich. And again, this is time for, I know our time is up, but it's time for UAE to get involved in that. Thank you.
Absolutely. And I think that's a great point to end on. Again, those opportunities, those synergies, and we'll be talking about that for the rest of the day, but I think that's a really good point to end on. It just remains for me to thank my speakers, Luis Alberto Moreno and Hamad Buamim. Thank you very much for speaking with us.